We're starting from scratch. Yariel from the Space Coast says his story is called Goat in the Wild. What's up, DLS and Chaz? I just wanted to share a quick two-stage Pros in the Wild story. I came up through my teens in the 90s, surfing up and down the Florida coast. One particular Lake Atlantic day, after scouring the Space Coast for any semblance of swell, I found myself at dusk with a buddy perched on the rails of the boardwalk that leads out to the first peak at Sebastian Inlet, pondering our ride home without ever even laying on our surfboards. Then, as stealthy as a ninja, appeared one Kelly Slater, the current world champ, holding an extremely sexy Channel Islands under one arm and an extremely exotic girl on the other. As he walked past us, he looked over and said, "What's up, Groms?" We were in awe, but also confused. Not only was it flat, but it was high tide and onshore. What happened next was surreal. We had been watching it for an hour. It was completely flat, yet 1 minute after Kelly paddled out, a set wave was refracting off the jetty. We watched as he caught countless waves and blasted the craziest airs we had ever seen at that point in time. Then, just as stealthily as he appeared, he was gone. A few weeks passed, and my buddy and I found ourselves in a similar situation, this time further north at 13th Street, Cocoa. We sat there again, pondering what we should do as we looked out at the flat ocean again. Then a luxed out Mercedes SUV pulls up and rolls down the windows. In the driver's seat was Kelly, who just looked at us, laughed, and said, "Hey, Groms, you want to catch a ride? You want to catch the high tide at Smyrna?" We looked at each other in disbelief. We jumped in and tried not to act all like aggressive fanboys, despite being totally enamored. Honestly, the whole ride seemed like it was just any other ride with your friends. Just a couple of guys blasting punk music that we had heard in surf videos and talking about our favorite sections the whole ride. In the water, after the first two waves, Slater paddles up and said, "Airtime." Then he spent the rest of the session sending every variation of air you could imagine. Anyways, a bit long-winded, but for as much as we kicked down the goat, he was just another surf-stoked rat from Florida like the rest of us. It is strange now to be retelling this story on a podcast. Florida was such a strange and transient place. I've got plenty more stories, from backstage with Donovan, watching Curran inside at the inlet in NSB, 5 a.m. nose beers with Bruce, beers with the Malloys, Perkins sessions with the Goods, many random Lopez sightings. It was all the norm in Florida at the time. Keep up the work, Yariel.
Love it, Ariel. That is great insight. And I love Kelly taking kids on rides. Look at that.
I do, and I think he summed it up nicely with, it's easy to make fun of now, but he was just a surf-stoked kid in Florida. Like,
Totally. And
that's
and the making fun of, again, is maybe it seems, I mean, maybe when I call him bad names and things like that, call him a shithead. What do I call Kelly sometimes?
I don't know, butthole.
Dumbass. Dumb shit. I think I call him a dumb shit a lot. He is that now, but that's okay. Like, it's all in love.
Is it?
But, I mean, sure. If Kelly called me a dumb shit, I would say, sweet. It's true.
Well, Kelly, surf stoke kid from Florida. That's hard to not sympathize with.
Yep.
The second story. So that's the front runner. He's winning a wetsuit right now until
so
we read
far.
another one. Sunny Day in Point Loma by Leroy in San Diego. I've lived in and around San Diego for the better part of 50 years, a skateboarder who surfs. Surfing with pros and former pros was never that impressive, with obvious exceptions like Justin Poston, Rob Machado, Joel Tudor, Rob Bain, Hans Hedemann, Skip Fry, Saxon Boucher, the Weatherlys, to name a few. These types of pros are really good at what they do, but as a skateboarder and a Mexican, I was always gravitated to the Hawaiians that I saw in the Wave Warriors videos. The Hoes, Dane Kealoha, Johnny Boy. They were more radical and almost violent in their approach. It reminded me of skating. They had dark skin like me. They were the surfers that I watched and that I tried to emulate. Fast forward to the early 2000s. I'd surfed everywhere in San Diego. I have respect for and a disregard for localism. San Diego is all bark and no bite. Countless times I've seen an altercation idle at words. I started spending time at an infamously localized spot at Sunset Cliffs, a notorious clown show of grumpy locals stiff never have beens and their kids. The demographic, mostly upper middle class, comfortable white men, bigoted, and as local as they come. I spent 5 years working my way silently into the pecking order, getting my waves, never burning anyone, no leash. I'd surf the wrong tides, the wrong swells for years. It was Bird from Bird's Surf Shed who opened the door for me because I ride weird boards and we both had a mutual love for leaks on white enchiladas. One day, I'm out with just two other grumpy locals, just three of us on a pleasant head-high morning, 3 to 4 waves per set every 10 minutes, and enough playing field that we don't really have to interact with one another. Perfect. That's when I noticed the two locals sitting tight in a huddle, talking, pointing at the shore, seemingly irritated. I'm nearsighted, so I can't see the shore, but I've seen this 1,000 times before. The two grumpy locals devising a plan to dispatch whoever's paddling out in hopes of adding a couple more waves to their count. The surfer on the shore starts paddling out, and the grumpy locals start posturing. I think this is great. No attention towards me. A set comes through. We all get waves, and we're scattered. And then on the last wave, the last wave is headed directly for the newcomer, who I now notice has particularly massive shoulders. He lowers his head, casually strokes into the wave, slides into pig dog stance, and now is easily identifiable as one Sonny Garcia. He sticks his arm in the wave to stall, then releases and weaves around the hook. No leash, just gets absolutely drained and comes flying out, just like I've seen in the movies and unlike anything that I've ever seen in real life. The grumpy locals are pissed and they don't know why, but it's clear to me Sonny just surfed their wave better than anyone, and it was his very first wave there. He proceeded to do this over and over again and then hit the lips so hard and throw so much spray that he'd actually be hitting it again before the spray from the first turn even landed. Faster, bigger, better than any surfing I had ever seen. Incredible stuff. Eventually, he lost his board, and I retrieved it on my way back out, and I paddled it to him. Quote, I'm thinking to myself, I gotta say something cool. Here's my opportunity to be heard by this impressive man. I slide the board to him, and he says, thanks, with that little speech impediment, and I melt down and just say, thank you, Sonny, like Ralphie in the Christmas Story. I screwed the pooch. What a queef. I watched Sonny take a breath, paddle out to the grumpy locals, and squash the animosity. Turns out that he had just signed with BYB out of North County, Backyard Boards, so he was spending a lot of time in the area. That day changed me. Watching how a true professional approaches the wave made me a better surfer. That aggressive but accepting approach to the wave was so informative. His let the surfing do the talking attitude was radical, and how he moved water was like witnessing blunt force trauma. Thank you, Sonny. You made us proud. Sincerely, Leroy.
I'm gonna put Leroy in the pole position.
I agree.
That's a great story.
We've got another story that
Will uplift us.
hopefully it's Sunny with a Side of Andy is the title.
Sweet.
So, hello, David and Chaz. This is Scott writing in from Misawa, Japan, I presume is how you pronounce it. As a staunch Grit listener and an ardent supporter of anything Chaz, loved Welcome to Paradise, Now Go to Hell. I've been a devoted follower of the Pros in the Wild series. I've been touched by the listeners' tales, each one stirring in me an urge to share my own story. However, being a man of the old school, a believer in the less spoken, the better, I never felt compelled to narrate my experience beyond the casual chats over beers with my closest surfing comrades. Yet, after listening to the show, I was inspired. It felt right to share a tale that might reshape perceptions about one of our greatest legends and perhaps perpetuate the narrative around another. It has been exactly 20 years since this story took place. Some memories have faded and exact words have probably changed, but this is how it happened to the best of my recollection. The story unravels in 2003, a year etched into my memory as my wife was 6 months pregnant with our first child. We embarked on a journey, driving from Sydney to the Gold Coast and back in a camper van. We drove our way up and down the coast while I surfed, soaking in the thrills of Australia pre-social media. It was the lead up to the first ASP event of the season at Snapper. With a multitude of pro surfers and their entourages descending upon the site, I decided to pitch camp at a lesser known yet high quality Point Break a little south, back on the New South Wales side of the border. So, on to the heart of the story. Almost immediately after paddling out. Sorry, my dog's freaking out. Mailman must be here. Almost immediately after paddling out, I observed none other than Sonny Garcia brazenly cutting off a young Grom on a set wave. My initial reaction was disbelief. That looked like Sonny. And then recognition. Yep, that was Sonny. And yep, that's par for the course. Following Sonny, Shea Lopez caught the next wave, then Corey Lopez, and then, lo and behold, Andy Irons. This was the year after his inaugural world title. Incredibly, this humble offbeat spot was invaded by a who's who of the surfing world of the time. As a lifelong surfer from Florida who'd attended university in Hawaii in the mid-'80s, I was awestruck by guys from my home state and legends from Hawaii. Sonny cemented his reputation with an unapologetic passion for burning, backpaddling, and snaking, making it into an art form. No one was spared, from old men to the youngest kid. He was very equitable. I learned that word in your last podcast, in his pillaging. He would have made Christian Fletcher blush with his no F's given attitude. The Lopez brothers, meanwhile, were cruising, not hassling, and effortlessly riding the best waves. As for Andy, he didn't catch many waves, but the ones that he did were a sight to behold. And there was one incident that is seared into the cringe compartment of my brain. A set rolled in, and, of course, Andy went first. I got maybe the fourth wave of the set, doing a few turns and speeding through the middle part of the point. As a goofy footer, this is a tricky section to make. As I started to pump to create speed to float a long section, I spotted Andy paddling out. He was right in the zone where I needed to land the float to round the section. I was certain that I could maneuver past him since I saw him paddling towards the shoulder, and so I committed to the move. Mid-paddle, he seemed to reassess and be concerned that I might actually have the speed to float all the way to where he was. And in that moment, he panicked and began to paddle towards the inside. Caught in the momentum, I was mid-float when he changed direction. My miscalculation and his sudden redirection led to our paths intersecting at precisely the wrong moment. And just like that, I found myself on a collision course with AI. We connected and then both bailed as our boards tangled. Underwater, my mind raced with thoughts of facing Sonny and AI's wrath on the beach, or worse, catching false cracks by the world champ himself. Despite being a decade older than Andy, I was panicking, thinking I had ran over the reigning world champ. Thankfully, when we surfaced, there was an exchange of awkward apologies. AI surprisingly took the blame, saying that he shouldn't have started paddling for the inside. It was a strange moment for both of us. As we started paddling back out, I said, "Hey man, I just want to wish you the best of luck this year. I hope you win another title." And being a huge fan, I was genuinely meant every word. Andy paused, sat up on his board, turned around. He was about a meter or two ahead of me, and he said, "Thank you for saying that," with his voice laced with sincerity. "It means a lot to me, knowing that I have surfers like you supporting me." He shook my hand, and with that, turned back around and continued paddling up the point, leaving me trailing far behind. I couldn't help but imagine him regaling his crew later with a story about how some kook ran him over. About an hour later or so, I paddled back in, strolled up to the camper, and perched on the headland overlooking the point. My wife excitedly remarks, "Andy Irons is out there." I nonchalantly respond, "Yeah, I know. I ran him over." Initially, she chuckled, thinking that I was just pulling her leg, but she recognized my serious expression and that I wasn't joking. I relay the story to her, and we both start laughing. Then she curiously asks, "Who's that guy burning everybody?" And I tell her, "It's Sonny." My wife, in her quintessential matter-of-fact way, simply says, "Oh," and breaks into a laugh. My wife is Japanese. She doesn't know surfing, but somehow she's gleaned enough to know about Sonny. That's when you know that you've truly transcended all barriers. You've become a legend, known across cultures and beyond the surfing community, if only for your infamy. I often reflect on this experience when I read things that do not put Andy in the greatest light. As for my encounter, Andy was the epitome of a professional and a gentleman. Sometimes I am glad that I ran him over just so that I could have had this experience. I guess the moral of the story is, if you really want to find out what kind of a person your hero is, run him over. All right, guys, thanks for all the great content and allowing me to share my story. Scott.